Okay guys, this video is going to be my opinion on Gus's 20 unpopular opinions that he created a few days ago. Roll it. Welcome back. So this is going to be my thoughts on Gus's 20 unpopular opinions, just like I said in my intro, which was actually 19 opinions because he accidentally skipped number 10. Me and Gus are friends, and this isn't a personal attack on Gus. Me and him have discussed this together in DMs, and we both understand that we don't have to agree or have the same opinions to actually be friends or get along. And he's absolutely okay with me making this video and pointing out why I disagree with most of his unpopular opinions. I guess you can even call it my unpopular opinions to Gus's unpopular opinions. And just a quick reminder, if you're new here or haven't subbed yet, if you do end up enjoying this video by the end of it, then
Hello, window lickers. Mortals. It's me, your favorite almighty Lord and Savior Jesus, and Galactic Underwear's YouTube channel is the answer to your prayers. I myself abandoned the Tower of the Mad Mage to come down here to give you this heavenly message. I am the most reputable person, ever. So subscribe to Galactic and like all his videos. He's out of this world. Follow Galactic and he'll shine a light on your path to salvation.
here we go. Gus's first unpopular opinion is that melee classes are in a great state, and that they are just fine, and that they need no changes. And by changes, he obviously means that they need no buffs. And I completely disagree because I don't think all melee classes are in a great state. They all have their own issues, and it is ridiculous to make a sweeping statement that applies to all of them. If the sample population is only dedicated endgamers, their performance is more a case of having the experience and skill development to overcome the limitations of their class regardless of the class itself. You can't say melee classes are fine the way they are and only limit them to endgame. Endgame players are the minority, and endgame content is a very small portion of the overall content available in the game. So in essence, most players are not seeing what you are saying. If you placed all melee classes on the left and ranged on the right, ranged classes are in a much better place than melee classes are currently. But it would be fair to say that with enough patience, practice, and dedication, any class can be a credible option at endgame. Gus's second unpopular opinion is that random queues are a major waste of time. Random queues may not be a productive use of time for endgamers, but that does not mean that they are without value for everyone, which is exactly what saying I don't recommend to anyone implies, regardless of how the video is prefaced. I also think random queues serve another purpose besides padding your pockets with astral diamonds. It is also a place where players can learn mechanics and socialize. New players don't know the ins and outs of how to make astral diamonds more efficiently in this game, and 2 or 3 days is not the lifespan of usefulness of random queues to new players. Their value as a practice space goes far beyond the rad bonus, and no one gets good without practice. The more lucrative sources of items to flip for astral diamonds are not farmable without some development already achieved, and the rad from those queues is a good source until other options overtake them. It would be fair to say that there are a lot of people who have unrealistic expectations or notions of what a random queue can give, who are then disappointed when these expectations are not met. But really, where is the fault here? With the content or with the expectations? And where do people get their unrealistic expectations from? Content creators who tell them that they have to get their item level up fast to be able to do random queues for rough astral diamonds. Gus's third unpopular opinion is that the new trial looks amazing and that it looks like the most challenging thing Neverwinter has ever put together or will ever put together in the future. So this one I can agree with. The trials sound like a fantastic challenge for endgamers, but if there's nothing for the rest of the population, then that sends a bad message. Gus's fourth unpopular opinion is it's better to have one great tune rather than 2, 3, 4, or however many tunes you have.
What the fuck are you talking about?
How arrogant is it to assume that if a person chooses to have multiple tunes that they are all mediocre? Some people thrive on variety and have made peace with the fact that spreading resources out slows the pace of progression. For some, slowing down the development and switching between alts when they feel the need for a change is what keeps the whole game fresh and interesting. For some, the fact that they play a variety of roles makes them better players, because because they understand what their teammates will be trying to do, as well as the role they are filling in the party. I personally know some really amazing players on PC that excel on multiple characters equally. Sure, there are advantages to having one primary toon that gets the lion's share of goodies and attention, but that doesn't automatically mean anyone who has more than one toon is doing it wrong. And as for the practice thing, there are a lot of players with one toon who need more practice to gain the skill levels needed. And guess where they should spend more time to get that practice? Yep, those random queues that were considered so pointless in opinion 2. Gus's fifth unpopular opinion is that tanks are vital but extremely easy and cheap to make. He emphasizes the extreme part. He also said that the tanks get expensive at endgame, but that is kind of confusing because I thought this was from an endgame perspective. Yes, tanks are vital, that is true, but cheap to make? Evidence to back that up would be nice. And don't forget what's cheap on one platform isn't automatically cheap on all of them. Plus, I don't even agree that they are cheap. Sure, they can tank without all the best insignias, companions, mounts, and gear, but that doesn't make them cheap. I know tanks that have multiple builds for different types of content. And don't forget, tanks often have to have completely different items for their DPS or healer loadouts, as some content you can't do efficiently on the tanking paragon. You can even say it's to a point where they are even more expensive than other classes. And you can also DPS and heal with very cheap gear too. It's not just a tank privilege. But if this is an endgame perspective, wouldn't that mean that the tank should be decked out with all the best gear and items as well, which in turn will make them expensive, right? Gus's sixth unpopular opinion is that telling people to join max level guilds is not good advice. I can completely agree that that is not what is always best for every player. Never seen it specifically recommended to facilitate Reaper's challenges, but it does get pushed by some creators and by the players that follow their advice as being one of the first things that a new player should do. Advising people to only join maxed out guilds is bad advice if the guild they join is full of windowlickers, you know, the bad kind, and they feel they can't leave because of losing item level. A guild that is the right fit for players is what is most important. If they are great guilds, then there's nothing wrong with also gaining 3,000 more item level and a few more boon options. Some players want lots of social elements and a maxed guild does not guarantee those. Some maxed guilds have lots, but then some growing guilds do too, including activities to help their guilds grow. But there are also guilds of both types that are stagnant, where nothing happens and shouts for parties or requests for advice go unanswered. Some people just want to be left alone to do their thing, and maybe join in the odd queue group when they feel like it. They might even like a quieter guild better. A guild that requires mandatory participation in activities would not be a good one for these players, whether it was maxed or a growing one. Some say maxed out guilds have more experience and helpful players, but in reality so do some growing guilds. Any active guild that is not solely focused on endgame is going to add far more to a new player's game experience than a dead guild, even if it has maxed out boons. Sometimes a growing guild can even offer more options for a new player, as gathering resources often takes place in the same areas where they need to spend time. On the flip side, some maxed guilds have a high level of elitism and toxic keyboard warriors. Not to say you don't get these in smaller guilds, but often smaller guilds are quicker to root out toxic problems. The reason most people want to join maxed out guilds is for the boons, and not just for the item level. Higher level guilds usually have more boon options available for their members, but no guild can offer all the boons, at least not at the present time. But having the right boons for their toons roles can be better than higher level boons that aren't a good fit. Also keep in mind, just because a guild is maxed out, it doesn't automatically mean it's an endgame guild. Most guilds, regardless of level, have a mix of players with a range of experience and development and who are active in different parts of the game. But for the experienced players who are solely focused on endgame, then a guild that specializes in endgame activities might be the place they are most happy. And let's not forget, when you join a guild, you are most likely also joining an alliance, which has multiple guilds. So in reality, you are joining multiple guilds that have multiple types of players of all levels to game with. And some players with alts also spread their toons out among different guilds within their alliance, so each one can have the boons that suits them best. Gus's seventh unpopular opinion is that people who use the word elitism are people who don't host, and he says if they hosted, they probably wouldn't use the word elitism again. So yeah, only non-hosts use the term elitism.
Pull it. Come on.
What utter bollocks. Lots of people who host parties aren't elitist. Lots of elitists never host. The two activities have zero causality. Elitism is a slippery concept because it has lots of nasty tentacles like a gangrenous mutant octopus. The hypocrisy of accusing other people of using a word they don't understand here is monumental. People who demand endgame development and gear for a run of content that doesn't require it to be successful and who don't make it clear that their run is for a special purpose are elitist. People who sneer at less developed players for not being endgame endgame yet are also elitist, and people who give the false impression that if a player isn't endgame already that they are nothing but dead weight are elitist. Plus, I really do think people don't really understand what elitism actually is. Elitism is not endgame specific. Elitism is an attitude that anybody can be afflicted with at any level. Even a 30k, 40k, or 50k item level player can have elitist behaviors. It's more of a personality trait that someone has. Elitists believe that those below them are noobs that do not know how to play the game the proper way, though it's only their definition of what the proper way is. So for me, elitism isn't tied to if someone hosts, they will stop using the term, since it applies to many different levels of players, not just endgame hosters. Gus's 8th unpopular opinion is that the endgame community is not toxic, that all endgame players are very helpful and welcoming, and if anything, the new players are toxic and not the endgamers. He also says that you can't be an endgamer and run endgame content and be an asshole.
Come on, bro.
No community online, real world gaming or otherwise, is 100% anything. So claiming it is nonsense. Some endgamers are wonderful people who actually have time for other people, who willingly share their expertise and knowledge. Others are harmless, doing their own thing, never causing a ruckus. Sadly, there are also others who are elitist and toxic, and little more than entitled brats who believe that just because they have gained endgame items or achievements, it gives them special privileges to treat other people like dirt. There is also the 4th type who are like the first example to people they consider their equals, who have the power to freeze them out of endgame runs, but fall into the 3rd example towards anyone who they consider to be beneath them. And yes, there are unpleasant people among new players, and min-game players too. Every population group has its share of armpits and assholes. However, labeling all new players as toxic is a form of elitism, and if that label is coming from the fact that someone new or resented being treated badly and called out the bullshit behavior they received, then that is really the lowest form of pettiness. But let me tell you, it's not all sunshine and rainbows at endgame. Not every player is an angel. There are some pretty toxic players at that level. Trust me, I know some of them. Endgame has its fair share of backstabbers. I know that wasn't a rogue pun. They have people who talk behind your back, but in front of you act all friendly and proper. And trust me, if anybody knows, it's me. Gus's 9th unpopular opinion is that it's very common to blame the tank or the healer for failed runs. And his truth is, for 99% of the game, it's the DPSer's fault for failing the content you are doing. And the reason he believes this is because 99% of the content doesn't need a tank or a healer. So since there is only DPS in the groups, then you can only blame the DPS. Superficially, this seems to be a point a lot of people could agree with, especially those who have tank or healer mains or tank or healer alts that you would condemn them for having. But what you are also saying here is 99% of the time they are not even needed.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
I don't agree with that at all. Seriously, the whole reasoning as to why it's always the DPSer's fault blew my mind in many different ways. I mean, obviously, if there are no goddamn tanks or healers in the queue or group, you can't blame them because they are not even there to begin with.
What's wrong with you?
This does seem like a pretty messed up way to put blame on DPS classes, and to be honest, somebody needs to stand up for the DPSers too. So it might as well be me. But let me ask you guys this. Do people really think that tanks or healers can't do no wrong? Do people really think that somehow tanks and healers are perfect players and never ever make mistakes? I keep hearing never blame the healer or the tank. And to that I say, why the fuck not if they deserve it? I mean, what, are tanks and healers levitating above the rest of us? They never make mistakes? I'm just trying to make a point here. And my point is that tanks and healers screw up too. And they screw up a lot sometimes. And that's okay because everybody screws up. DPSers, tanks, healers, Will Smith, but to sit there and suggest that it's always the DPSer's fault is insane to me. I mean, it's never really good to blame anyone of any class. What really needs to happen is players of all roles need to own their own fuck-ups and not pass the blame on to whoever they think it was an easy diversion from their own inadequacy. And at the end of the day, if you really do believe healers and tanks aren't needed for your groups, just run all that stuff in private queue with 5 DPS and see how well that goes. And if you do that as an added bonus to the rest of us, there will be more supports to go around for the DPS who actually appreciate their value. 10. Hello? Is anybody here? Hello? Anybody? Anyone out there? Hello? Hello? Just kidding. There is no actual 10th unpopular opinion because, like I said in the intro, he accidentally skipped it and went straight to 11. So Gus's 11th unpopular opinion is he thinks telling people to cap their stats is bad advice. And he also goes on to say that most of the players go over, which means they are actually wasting stats. To start with, only rating values can go red, and only people who don't understand how they work advocate for capping or going over on those. Most people, when they say cap your stats, are referring to the total percentage values. And while I can agree that people should be more clear in their word choices to prevent misunderstandings, helping players understand that those total percentage values are what determine the outcome outcome of their action in combat is never a waste of time. Making sure they know that making geared choices to bring those total percentage values as close to cap as possible is a worthy goal to strive for, and warning them that poor choices just to get a quick bump on item level will not only trash those total percentages, but also puts them at risk of being excluded by other players who judge them as not being good enough to play with. So what would the actual advice be if it's not to cap your stats? Would you tell a player to get to 87 or 88%? Capping your stats is optimal, and keeping them at 90% for as long as possible is good enough. There's nothing wrong with being at 85% or 87 or 88, but there's also nothing wrong with telling someone to cap their stats if they can. And if they can't, then no big deal. At least they have something to strive for. But to say it's bad advice is completely unreasonable. Gus's 12th unpopular opinion is accuracy is an amazing stat. Accuracy does deserve more credit than it gets, but if you can't articulate why you think it's better or perhaps offer up some evidence to support your claim, then you might just as well say it's just best because it's pretty in a cursive font. Accuracy is the opposing stat to deflect severity, but it reduces the mitigation when your target deflects your attack. It doesn't actually increase the damage you do. It just lets more of it land on your target. And I would love to see examples of this creating more damage and combat advantage. And like so many other things, accuracy is better for some classes than others, and there is definitely a reason it's called a dump stat. Gus's 13th unpopular opinion is that the Envenomed artifact is dog shit, and the reasoning is you always have to wait for someone's Envenom to cool down, and the rest are waiting for your artifact cooldown so they can actually proceed, and he actually wishes they banned the artifact altogether. Well, I do think that's a little bit of an overreaction, Gus. I mean, to ban an actual artifact because you have to wait 20 or 30 seconds or whatever. That only matters if you are speedrunning. And I assume if you are speedrunning that the players with you already know not to use it. Also, wanting it to get banned doesn't just ban it for endgame players only. It bans it for every level of player who finds usefulness in it. The Envenomed artifact is actually very good at helping you get your AP back. And it also stuns enemies which lower level players that run lower level content will find useful. That's why we call it the stun book. Also, let's not forget that the Envenomed is part of the journal set, which some players still use and get value out of. And that shit wasn't cheap. Many players bought them with Zen, others from the auction house with insanely high prices, and others earned them from the events. Yeah, I don't think the artifact slowing down your dungeon run by 20-30 seconds justifies it being banned due to annoyance. I know you are speaking from an endgame perspective, but the banning of that artifact would affect everybody, not just endgamers, which can also be considered elitist. Also, if you're going to say it's an endgame perspective, maybe keep the topic strictly endgame related, so that they don't trickle down and affect the newer, less skilled, less wealthy players who can't afford to just throw something away to avoid triggering someone who hates waiting. Just saying. Gus's 14th unpopular opinion is AoE damage does not matter. So again with some mixed messages. Prefacing the video this is from an endgame perspective, then making sweeping statements that appear to be about the game as a whole is just an invitation for either misunderstandings or drama. Sure, bosses are more important, but to say AoE doesn't matter at all is a bit much. For the relatively small part of the game that was defined as the only part of interest to you, it may be that the mob activity is just for flavor, and the bosses are the most relevant part of the content. But even if it doesn't matter to you or matters less in general, AoE skills are more effective at killing mobs. Obviously, hardly anybody will get stuck on mob phases as they are relatively easier compared to bosses, but there's nothing wrong with wanting to be more effective in AoE, even if it's just to prove that you can. And I do agree it matters less, but does it matter at all? That depends on the perspective and on the level of the player. There are lots of places where AoE damage still matters, even if it matters less. For those people who are not yet at the point where only endgame trials offer any kind of challenge, the advice to not bother with AoE at all has the potential to make them waste a lot of time in Astral Diamonds. And if it actually doesn't matter, maybe we should contact the devs and ask them to remove all AoE skills and use only single target powers. Or maybe we should just ask them to make AoE matter more by creating stronger mobs. And come on, Gus. Spiders and MTOS are extremely easy. You mean extremely easy for super endgame groups that are overpowered and blah 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 blah. Stop the cap, Gus. Gus's 15th unpopular opinion is that people hate the leaderboard, but he thinks it's great because it's the only tool consoles have to measure damage. Sure, it's fine to like the leaderboard, and when it's the only tool you have to make do, but to actually love it? I mean, have you heard of Stockholm Syndrome? Providing certain caveats are held firmly at the front of the mind, it is true that Paingiver can be a rough guide, but it is also so easily skewed. Making the most of the only tool you have is admirable, but can you honestly say you'd keep it if a better alternative was offered? You know, one that doesn't promote the behavior of toxicity. It would, of course, be so much better if you could download your log files. They can give you huge amounts of data, but to be able to perform proper comparisons, there would have to be the same conditions for all these tests, which might have more to do with the lack of donations of PC data than anything else. Gus's 16th unpopular opinion is that people asking to join groups are beggars.
Stop it. Get some help.
Just like the people who ask for free items are. And this one is the one that kind of triggered me a bit, and I'll explain why. So on the part about people begging for gifts from strangers, I can agree. The whole point is to earn these things, but putting people advertising themselves as available for parties in the same league as people expecting freebies really does stretch the definition of begging to a breaking point. Some players are on time constraints, and even as a host, it can take time to put a group together. In some cases, either they can't afford to wait for the off chance that someone asks for players to join the specific queue they need, or they need to find a group sooner rather than later. Also, that player has to contend with other players that are also trying to get into queues. They will offer themselves, and if they don't get an invite in the available time, they will move on to other things. Not everyone who isn't the host just apathetically waits, then complains about waiting afterwards. Some might have just joined the chat and are offering themselves to fill gaps in partly filled groups already being hosted by someone else before going to the step of hosting one for themselves. There is nothing wrong with offering your DPS, healer, or tank to be added to a queue. That is not begging. And yes, it can be easier to host, but hosts will have no one to invite if no one puts their hands up and says, I'm free for one of those. Saying it is the same as begging is definitely something only elitists should be saying. Think about it. Plus, not everybody is comfortable hosting. Some hate it and some don't really care for it. And some players are lazy, and any of them might rather plus up or ask to join groups. And for me, there is completely nothing wrong with doing that. Gus's 17th unpopular opinion is wizards are not overpowered and that they need more buffs. You're right, wizards as a class are not overpowered. They are extremely overpowered. Because I don't know who you're playing with on console, but on PC, wizards are fucking insane. Some players who play wizards do more damage due to skill, or maybe even animation cancelling to push their output far beyond what is intended. But as for needing a buff, the dust should be allowed to settle in the last round of buffs before it all gets stirred up again. And there are plenty of other candidates that need some attention before the wizards get another polish. Other classes need some huge buffs. And trust me, that class is not the wizard. Gus's 18th unpopular opinion is that Stormforged weapons are dogshit. Stormforged weapons are not dogshit. First of all, they are free weapons that you can get through a campaign. They have a huge item level, they also have weapon damage, and they have great bonuses as well if you know how to activate them properly. Sure, that Endgame Masterwork is still preferred, but to call them dogshit is something only an elitist should be saying, because Stormforged is definitely not dogshit. Gus's 19th unpopular opinion is that Juma being removed from Valenhas is a great move. And I kind of agree to a point with that statement. It is true, this isn't the end of the world that Juma is getting removed from Valenhas. But Juma is going to be moved to Menzoberranzan when the new module goes live. And here again is where the mixed messages come in. What Juma offers is aimed at new players. Stuff to give them at the start. Endgamers should be beyond needing what he can give regardless of what maps he's on. I was never a fan of Juma because time versus reward, Juma was simply bad, and I made a whole video explaining the reasons why I believe he's bad. But he still served some new players well by giving them decent entry-level armor and the chance at some random mounts and companions. The gear has been replaced by the epic dragon hunt stuff, and the other 1,225 armors are still available from the Avernus treasure chests. Now there is some question as to how much value he'll be offering. I mean, he does have epic dragon hunt gear, and it will be in Menzoberranzan, so most of the players who already have the item level to go to Menzoberranzan will already have better gear. So, if Juma has really decent gear, then I guess he can be valuable. But as he stands, he's not really good. But that being said, I never did and do not believe in the removal of content. Just the betterment of that content as a whole. Removing content is never a good thing. Just because Juma sucked lately doesn't mean he can't get better in the future. But for the most part, I do agree he was kind of trash. Now let's go to Gus's 20th unpopular opinion, which is his final opinion. And Gus's 20th unpopular opinion is that the game is more balanced now than it ever has been before. Alright, so for this I'm going to have a lot to say, so you're going to have to bear with me. And this could probably have a whole video on its own, but here we go. Balance, question mark, where is the balance that you speak of? It is fair to say that they are trying to address the worst imbalances, but it's a long process and one that never really ends. And even if it is more balanced now than it was in the past, that doesn't mean there aren't imbalances still causing issues. I mean, Pally Heal Love got deferred to module 25 or 26. probably because once they looked under the hood, it wasn't a job that they could finish in the time available. If the game is so balanced, then why are MTOS hosts specifying that they want wizards more than any other class? And why do so many people advise against barbarian tanks? And while at first glance it might seem like everything is balanced, there are other factors that are contributing to huge imbalances in the game that still haven't been fixed. I mean, do you even know how many powers are not working as intended? And I'm not sure what's going on consoles when it comes to balance, because on consoles animation cancelling can't be macroed. So they most likely animation cancel much less than PC players do, because I can tell you for a fact that we have huge issues on PC with macros and animation cancelling causing imbalances. Now, that being said, I have had personal conversations with the executive producer from time to time about various subjects in Neverwinter, and recently one of those was about animation cancelling. The TLDR version is if a player ekes out a small, less than 10% increase to their damage through skillful use of tab moves to animation cancel, then they aren't really worried about that. But anything that causes a significant unintended boost to output, that is not what they want, and it will be addressed. And as this summary of his comments on this subject from the recent livestream shows, he isn't just saying it to me. He goes on to say, animation cancelling falls into two broad types, using tab moves and exploiting loopholes in macros. Several classes have moves where the first type was expected, as there are also inbuilt limits. The second type, though, will be stamped out. Do not expect these to continue. Those were the actual words from the livestream. Abuse of loopholes and exploits aside, some classes benefit from animation cancelling, while others hardly get any benefits at all. As an example, warlocks get most of their damage from animation cancelling, and without it, they wouldn't be able to compete as much as they do now, or dish out the amount of damage they dish out right now on PC. And on the other side of that coin, you have rogues who can't animation cancel anything with any true benefit, except for some weird thing that you could do with Duelist Flurry and Gloaming Cut, which I don't even know how to do anyways. There are still fusion and legacy characters in the game as well, and we can't really speak of balance if things like this are allowed to persist in the game. Fusion and legacy need to be fixed once and for all, and animation cancelling needs the abuses identified and eradicated. And classes need to be looked at too. If a class can only be competitive because it can compensate through animation cancelling, doesn't that suggest that the thing that needs to be compensated for should be fixed instead? It's easy to talk about magnitudes and cooldowns being balanced within a consistent range, but even if balanced, they are often being overridden by these other factors, which is causing huge differences in damage outputs for some classes, which leaves other classes unable to compete. So in essence, this might be one of the most unbalanced times in recent Neverwinter history due to macros, animation cancelling, legacy characters, and fusion characters all existing at the same time. And these are not things I'm bringing to life out of thin air, nor are they figments of my imagination. These are actual problems that exist that ruin game balance, and they have been acknowledged by the EP himself. Of course, they vary from platform to platform, but they are real problems. But it is also fair to say that sometimes the cry of imbalance isn't really about balance. It's because someone has flawed expectations and doesn't like it when those get exposed. So there you have it, Gus. You asked us to disagree with you, and that is exactly what I did. If anybody hasn't seen Gus's video, feel free to go have a look and listen to it before you watch mine. His link is in the description. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And if it isn't any trouble, please like and subscribe. Galactic here. Peace out. Stay safe.
From the land of ashes, where fear and terror dwell, we'll rise like giants ready to fight together. We won't